All right, coffee. So yeah, I've stopped. I tried one live stream without coffee when I was doing them in the evenings, and it was just really hard. So I've started doing live streams during the day now, and that makes sure that I've got enough coffee in my system to be able to explain stuff on the fly. Because normally when I'm when I'm recording, if I can mess something up or whatever, I can just go back and edit it. But when you're doing it sort of live, you're doing it all on the fly, and your brain has to think so much faster. Okay, so here we go. We're in PHP API Pro live stream number 6. So what I've been working on recently, I've got quite far ahead since the last stream, and we are now on sort of related resources and also getting into some pagination, some filtering, sorting, and stuff like that. And made a few design decisions around what we're going to do here, which I'll explain first. And then what we'll do is we'll go into some pagination and we'll create a nice reusable component. Before I do that, I'm just going to cough. All right, that's better. Okay, so I think when I did the last live stream, we were still at this stage here where we only had flights, but now I've added some related resources. And so we now have passengers and reservations. I'm going to focus mainly on reservations in this one because that's a good demo because it's related to both passengers and flights. And so a couple of design decisions, that's hard to say, a couple of design decisions which I've made here is whereas previously when we're looking at collections, so for example with flights, to retrieve a collection of flights, we just came off this flights endpoint. I've done the same thing for passengers and the same for creating flights. However, with reservations, just to mix it up a bit, in order to retrieve a collection of reservations, what we are doing is we're retrieving them off this endpoint here. So a reservation can't exist without a flight existing. And so I made the decision that in order to retrieve reservations, you'll retrieve them for a particular flight. And so the endpoint will be this. It will be flights followed by the flight number. So you're looking at one particular flight and then retrieving all the reservations for that flight number. And the same decision applies to creating flights, not flights, creating reservations. You can't create a reservation if a flight doesn't exist. So we're sort of enforcing that by making the create reservation endpoint this one here. So we'll need a flight and a flight number in order to create a reservation for that particular flight. All of the other operations relating to reservations, we can do them just using a reference. Once a reservation is created, we'll have a reservation reference. So in order to retrieve a single reservation, we can just use a reference. Same for delete, same for update. Yeah, and so let's have a look at pagination and what this looks like. So down at the bottom here, in like the OIS in your Swagger editor, you can sort of design your response content. And this is what we've come up with here. So we have the reservations key, and that will be an array of reservations. And then we have two more keys. We have links for pagination, pages of pagination, and also some metadata, which contains mainly pagination information. And so if you remember, right back towards the start of the course, we spoke about Hypermedia APIs and how by having links and providing as much information as possible for the client to go and discover other parts of your API just makes it so much more usable, a much better experience. And with something like pagination, it's vital, really. If someone requests the first page of records and they want 10 records, then they're going to need to know how many records in total. How can they get to the next page, the last page? They're going to need to know the paths in order to achieve that. And so I have something which is working. Here we are in Postman. And as you can see, we're getting back all of our records here. If we fire this off, I'm asking for page 2 and 10 items per page. So this is all working. It's telling me that I'm on page 2. The next page is page 3. Previous page is page 1. So we have a nice working solution. It's telling us total items, total pages, current page, items per page. But let me show you that solution. And here it is. Basically, all of that pagination metadata, and all the information needed to produce that pagination. To get it working, I've just blasted it all into this index method on the reservations controller. So in this one, what I'm going to do is we're going to have a little deep dive into how the pagination actually works, how we use the information that the client provides in order to produce that pagination that I showed you. But we're also going to refactor all of this away, because we're not just going to want to paginate reservations. We'll need to paginate flights. We'll need to paginate passengers. Any resource which has a collection, ideally, we want to be able to paginate. So we need something more reusable than this. Okay, so let's get into the code. I'll just jump off screen now if I can. So I'll just talk through how this works. In order for pagination to work, you need to know the number of total items. It won't work unless you have the total number of items. And then we need to know the page. So we're asking for client preferences here. So we're saying to the client, what page do you want and how many items per page? And that is information that the client can supply using query parameters. So we are grabbing the query parameters and getting the page key off there, and also items per page. If we are not supplied with that information, we're just going to set defaults. And so that's what we're doing here. We're saying if we don't have a page query param, if we don't have an items per page query param, what we're going to do is we're just going to set default values of 1 and 10. And then in order to figure out a lot of the things which you need for pagination, we need to do a little bit of fairly simple maths, but I'll show you how that works. So we need to know the total number of pages. As you can see, in order to generate the links, in order to send that value back, we need to know the total number of pages. And so we take the total number of items. That's done by a query in our reservation repository. The items per page is supplied to us by the client. We divide total items by items per page, but we also have to round that up. And the reason is because, say for example, it's we have a total number of items of 10 and we have 3 items per page. That means we're going to have sort of 3.33 pages, which obviously that can't happen. So we need to round it up. So we make sure that in that scenario, we would get 4 pages. We'll cast that to an integer. The other piece of information we need is the path, because that's how these links are made up. As you can see, they start off with a path, flights, flight number, reservations, followed by the pagination preferences. And in Postman, these are actually clickable. If I click on one of these, what it will do is it will open a new tab, as you can see, and it's auto-populated all of that information from the path there. And I can actually just hit send, and it will send it off. And as you can see, now we are on page 3. And so, yeah, that's a pretty cool little feature. So we know that our paths are working there. And again, that is information which we get from the request. And so we then have enough information in order to create the links, and we should have enough information in order to create the metadata. But before we go any further and start refactoring and creating something reusable, let's just dive into the query to see how the actual pagination works. How are we actually getting back these 10 records here? And how are we selecting those 10 records and making sure that we get the correct ones? So I have the reservation repository, and there's a method on there, find active reservations by flight number. When I say active reservations, we want the ones which are not cancelled. Okay, so there's a cancel at field on the reservations table, and so we only want active reservations. So starts off fairly bog standard, just a select query there. These are the fields that I want. We're joining on flight and passenger because we want the flight number and the passenger reference. We don't want any cancelled reservations. We want only active reservations. And we are using the flight number in order to look up these reservations. But this is where the pagination happens. And so we're passing in that page, which we get from the client, and also items per page. And we're using that to figure out how do we get the actual results that the client is looking for. And so we need to set the first result, and this will be an index. And the way this works is like this. So say, for example, we have the client has asked for page 1. That will be page 1 minus 1 is 0 multiplied by the limit. The limit is the number of items per page. But we've used the word limit in here because limit is more sort of the language which fits SQL queries. But what that means is the items per page. So 1 minus 1 multiplied by 10 is 0. So 0 will be the first record, and we're asking for a maximum number of 10 records. And so that is how that will work for page 1. If we have page 2, 2 minus 1 is 1 multiplied by 10 is 10. And so the records will start at index 10, and we will get 10 records in order to get the correct records for page 2. So hopefully that's clear, and hopefully now you know how pagination works. But like I say, what we'd like to do is refactor this so that we have a reusable artifact at the end of it. And so when you're doing a refactor, the things which you need to consider, the main things when you're starting out, what will be your inputs and what will be your outputs? And I'll usually work backwards from the outputs when I'm doing this. I tend to find working backwards, you're sort of starting with the result and working backwards, and I think it gives you a better chance of success when you do that. Start with a win and then work backwards from there. And so the information that we need is our query needs the page and the items per page and the actual data that we are sending back. And that is in order to generate the reservations. So we need the page and the items per page to generate the reservations. And then we're also going to need the links and the metadata. And so I figured that out to be 4 items of data there, which are essential to make this work. That is what we need to, that is what our refactoring needs to produce. So I worked ahead and I came up with just a data object, which I've just called pagination metadata. And that simply holds those 4 pieces of information: page, items per page, links, metadata. Those are the essentials. Those are what we need for pagination to work and in order to send back the correct data. Okay, and so we have enough information here to actually generate all of that in order to create a pagination metadata object. So we need to do something with all of this information here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a factory class, which will take some of the information here, and at the end of it, spit out the information that we want back. So I'll go and create that now. I've just got this in a folder called pagination. Yeah, very creative of me. And so we have pagination metadata. Let's call this pagination metadata factory. And this is simply going to produce a pagination metadata object. So metadata, the thing with metadata is that literally every letter in the word is all like grouped together. And so with my big hands, it's not easy to type. So when I'll practice this a couple of times, and I've always struggled typing the word metadata factory. Right, so pagination metadata factory. We'll declare our strict types. I've still not got around to setting that up as to do that automatically. And on here, I'm just going to create a public static function, and this will be called create. While I'm writing code, I'll just jump off screen again. Create, and this is going to create a pagination metadata object. Okay, so we know what this needs to produce. That is going to be the output, pagination metadata. But what are the inputs? So let's go back to our reservations controller. And I figured out I could get all of the information that I need here just by deriving from 2 inputs. And those are request, because from request, I can get my query parameters and I can get my path. And so therefore I can get also page and items per page, and then total items. So here is where we did a count query to get the number of total items, and using that I'm able to do the maths here to figure out the total number of pages and therefore complete the rest of the links and complete the rest of the metadata. So for our pagination metadata factory for this create method, we're going to need the request, which is actually an instance of server request interface, which is a bit of a mouthful. So let's just create an alias there and inject it as the alias. So request, and notice I'm using the exact same names here, and this will make life easy for us. So, and the other one, we called it total items. So I'm using the exact same name. So when we come to actually strip all this from here and drop it in here, I won't need to go thinking about making up variable names and things like that. Should all be done for us. Okay, so why static? Now, the reason why I've gone with static here is I got asked this question about something else like a couple of weeks ago. And my answer was, why not static? Because we don't actually need a physical object for this. All we're doing is we're asking it to take these two pieces of information and just produce one of these at the end of it. There are no third-party dependencies. I can't think of anything which I might need to mock here. I think this will be totally testable just to leave as it is. We don't have any constructor or any outside dependencies which were injected into this. It's just going to perform a function just like any standalone PHP function. And so that is why I decided to make it static. Okay, and so let's see how we can get this to work. If we go back to reservations controller, what I'd like to do is cut out all of this stuff now and replace it simply with a pagination metadata object. So here we're going to say pagination metadata equals pagination metadata factory create. We'll pass the request. We will pass total items. And then what that means is now that we have this pagination metadata object, I'll just jump off screen again, we can grab the information that we need off of that. So here we're going to say pagination metadata page. Instead of items per page, we're going to say pagination metadata items per page. And then down where we do the serialization to send back the information to the client, links, we're going to say pagination metadata links. And then for meta, same again, pagination metadata meta. Okay, this isn't going to work yet. What we need to do is go to the pagination metadata factory. I cut all that into memory, paste that in there, and you'll notice that everything is just matching up because I use the exact same name variables. And so there's nothing here that I need to change. Not only do those names match, but also the parameters for my pagination metadata class here will all match things which I've used inside of here. So minimum amount of work, just make life simple for yourself by using consistent names, using names that make sense. And also with things like PHP Storm now, it will see that I'm looking for a page parameter. And when I hit like the little $sign, it will automatically see that I have a variable on this page in this file called page. And it'll say, do you want this? Yes, I do. And so one day, PHP Storm is just going to write all of my code for me without me having to do anything. I can't wait till that day comes. Right, there we go. I think this is going to work now. So let's go back to reservations controller and just dump it out. So I like to dump things out every step of the way. So that way you find out, you get fast feedback, you know, if something's gone wrong early. Rather, I know developers like mid-level developers and juniors, and they'll blast out hundreds of lines of code and then like check to see if it works, and they'll find out. And then when you go and debug it for them, you'll find out that actually the break was about 100 lines of code previously. So let's go back to Postman, fire this off. We're dumping out something, and we have a pagination metadata object. Okay, it's telling us that we're on page 3. We have 10 items per page. We have all of our links, which look correct. So notice here, page 3, 10 items per page. 31 items in total. I know that's correct. 4 pages. So all of this is looking good to me. And what that means is we can remove our die and dump there, and we can just go and make a real request If we make it look pretty, we should see 10 reservations. All of our links are working correctly. Let's go to the last link, which is this one here, page 4. And if we send this off, we should see we only have one record here. And then you'll also see that we don't have a next page because we are on the last page. So that's working nicely. We now have a solution which is working for reservations controller. But the whole point of this was to actually have something which was reusable, wasn't it? So you haven't proved that something is reusable until you reuse it. So what we'll do is we'll go and test the theory, and we'll drop this into our flights controller also. So quick reminder of how this works. I've changed it slightly because we wanted to paginate this. So I've worked a little bit ahead, and I've created a flights repository because we wanted that pagination. And I've done a similar thing here. Here we're retrieving, I've got no filters. We're just retrieving all of the flights, but also paginated. And I've set some defaults here of page 1 and a limit of 10. So if we go and fire this at the moment, here's flights. Even though I'm asking for page 1 and 3 items per page, we'll actually see 10 items because we're not using the client preferences just yet. So we're going to inject those in a moment once we've got our pagination metadata factory working for flights. So what are the 2 pieces of information that we need in order for it to work? We need a request, but we also need total items. At the moment, we don't have total items here. So I'm just going to do a quick and dirty way of doing this. Now, this will work for what we have at the moment, but it isn't going to work if we were to add filtering, because this query that I'm going to do here, so I'm going to say total items equals this, and we'll just get it off Entity Manager, get repository, flight class. I'm just going to do a count off of here. And so by doing that, that is going to count every single flight. But later on, we're going to want to filter by origin, destination, things like departure time, in which case you won't want to count all of the flights. You'd want to count the flights after they have been filtered. You want to know what the total items is of the actual record set which you are requesting. So later on, I am going to have to change this, but I'm not going to dive into that all right now because it's a live stream and it's quite a bit of work. Our ultimate goal here is to prove that the pagination metadata factory works for all resources. So we now have a request. We now have total items. We should be able to say pagination metadata equals pagination metadata factory, create, pass the request, pass the total items. And so that means when we're filtering for flights, remember we have a page and limit parameter. What that means is here for page, I can say pagination metadata, just going to cough again. Pagination metadata page and pagination metadata items per page will be the limit. Sorry, not top. Pagination metadata items. What's going on there? It's because I've got a $sign. Items per page. All right, good old live streaming, eh? So pagination metadata items per page. That means we should get a paginated record set of flights, I think. Let's dump this out. So that means I should get a total of 3 flights because that is what the client is requesting. The client is requesting 3 items per page. Go over to flights, 3 items per page. Let's test the theory. Something is being dumped out. So I have an array with 3 items in 3 flights. Perfect. So we know that this is looking good. So that is paginated, but you'll notice that if I fire this off now, yeah, we get back a paginated record set, but we don't yet have our metadata. And so that's what we just need to add here. Can you remember how we do this? So there's 3 keys which we send back, and that is links, that will be pagination metadata links, and also meta, and that will be pagination metadata meta. All right, moment of truth. Let's go back. Postman, fire this off. 3 records, and there are our pagination links. So pagination links and pagination metadata. This time we're on page 1, and so if you're on page 1, you won't have a previous. So self is page 1, first is page 1, obviously, last is page 4. So there's 10 flights in the database. We've asked for 3 per page, which means we're going to need a total of 4 pages. And next is page 3. So total items 10, 4 pages, 1 current page is 1, and 3 items per page. Okay, and so that really wraps it up. That's what I've been working on recently. I'm now actually onto filtering and sorting, which is quite interesting, and it's one of those things which you really have to get the order right when you're doing filtering and sorting. The order in which you paginate, the order in which you filter, very important. So like we were just talking about here, this thing here, total items, we actually need to count we need to filter the items first and then count the filtered total items. All right, so quick recap of what we did there. We took that sort of the hard-coded, all of that pagination logic that was hard-coded into the reservations controller index method. And we just did a big refactor. And there are certain things you've got to consider. So I've made some notes here so I don't forget what I'm going to tell you. So for pagination, the essential things that you need to know are, in order to produce the metadata and the links, you're going to need the path. You need total items, you need to know the page, and you need to know the items per page. Things to consider. I remember when I said use language that fits the context. So what I mean by that, if we go back to the reservations controller or even the pagination metadata factory. So when we're talking about things like items per page, when we're dealing with query parameters, then it makes sense to call the variables items per page because that is what the client is referring to it as. But then when we went and actually made the query, when we passed that information into the find active reservations by flight number query, inside of there, we actually referred to the same thing as limit. And the reason why we did that is because in the sense of sort of paginating and performing SQL queries, then that language, that word limit, makes more sense to a SQL query than what items per page would. And so, yeah, just use variable names and things which actually make sense, which fit the context and which are consistent. And you saw how little I had to do there when I made that refactor, just by using the same variable names and names which made sense to the context. Refactoring, when to use and not use statics. So if I'd have made pagination metadata factory, if I'd have made it non-static, things to consider is we would have had to, it would have been one more thing which we need to rely on dependency injection for. We would have had to inject it into our controller. And thinking about it, you know, we didn't need any state. It didn't have any dependencies. It was just performing a quick throwaway function with 2 pieces of information which were known to us and which we could just pass in. And it was just producing this. So if it was doing anything complex and relying on other dependencies, then you might think, well, this could be tough to set up if you wanted to do some testing and you might want to mock it, but we didn't really have that scenario. And so that's the decision I made on why to use statics. It made life simpler for us in the circumstances, and it wasn't going to make life any more difficult when we came to actually testing it, I don't think. Model the data you need. So yeah, working with refactoring, what data do you need? What is the end goal? And we just needed 4 bits of information, didn't we? So we took that, created a model, which was our pagination metadata object here, class here. We modeled what we wanted, and then we were able to just encapsulate things and produce something which is nice and clean and reusable. Know your inputs and your outputs. Match signature parameter names to your variables. Yeah, so just use consistent names. The more consistent you are with your names, the less rework and changing things around you'll have to do. And try and get your variable names right first time. All right, so just to follow up, obviously, while I'm spieling this off on a live stream, it's going to be hard to code along, but this does get recorded. It is on YouTube. If you want to go and work along with this afterwards, then the branch you'll need, I'll leave a link in the description of the video. The branch you'll need is one called Live Stream 6. That starts at the very same point as where I've just started, so you can just work through it in your own time, make sense of things in your own time, and you'll have all the code there. Okay, and then apart from that, once again, make sure you visit the course page. I'm making good progress now, but this middle section, I've said this about every section, it's turned out to be longer than what I expected it to be. So this was meant to be like one chapter, but we did all the nested resources and related resources in one. That ended up being about 15 videos. And so I put pagination, filtering, and sorting into a whole separate chapter. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to release a sample from the course, which will all be about pagination, filtering, and sorting. So once I've got this next few videos released, I'll be able to share that with you, and you should enjoy that, I think. So yeah, that's what I'm talking about there. Apart from that, I think we're done. So yeah, thanks for joining me for this lunchtime session. I think it's gone fairly smoothly. That's been fun. The coding ones are much more fun than explaining theory and stuff. But that's it for now. So enjoy the rest of your day, and bye for now.